Every year, nearly 2 billion people wake up before dawn, eat in silence, and then stop eating completely until sunset. No food, no water, sometimes for 14 hours, sometimes for 18. This is Ramadan. But here's the question most people never ask. Did this tradition begin with Islam, or is it much older? Tonight, we're going back more than 1,400 years, and even further. Fasting did not begin with Islam. Long before the 7th century, long before the Arabian Peninsula became the center of a new religious movement, human beings were already experimenting with hunger, deliberately. Across civilizations, across climates, across belief systems, people chose to stop eating, not because food was unavailable, but because restraint meant something. In ancient Judaism, fasting was observed on solemn days, such as Yom Kippur, a day of atonement and reflection. Food and drink were set aside to focus on repentance and spiritual clarity. Early Christianity adopted similar practices. Before Easter, many Christians fasted during Lent, sometimes abstaining from meat, sometimes reducing meals entirely. The idea was simple: discipline the body to strengthen the spirit. Even outside Abrahamic traditions, fasting appeared repeatedly. In parts of ancient Greece, philosophers associated self-denial with mental clarity. In India, various Hindu and Jain traditions incorporated fasting as purification and self-control. Buddhist monks practiced structured eating windows to reduce attachment to physical desire. So fasting was not a regional idea. It was a human one. Why? Because hunger changes perception. When you remove constant consumption, awareness sharpens, time feels slower, gratitude intensifies, self-control becomes visible. Fasting also created social signals. When an entire community abstained together, it reinforced belonging. Shared discomfort created shared identity. Now, shift to pre-Islamic Arabia. The Arabian Peninsula in the 6th and early 7th centuries was not spiritually empty. It was religiously diverse. Pagan tribal beliefs existed alongside Jewish and Christian communities, especially in trading cities like Mecca and Yathrib, later known as Medina. Certain months were already considered sacred. During these months, tribal conflict was paused. Trade caravans could move safely. Ritual observances took place. Historical sources suggest that forms of fasting were known among some Arab groups even before Islam. Additionally, contact with Jewish and Christian communities meant exposure to structured fasting traditions. In other words, the concept of abstaining for spiritual reasons was already circulating in the region. But it was not yet standardized. It was not universal. It was not synchronized across tribes. This matters because when Islam emerged in the early 600s, it did not introduce fasting into a vacuum. It encountered a world where fasting already carried symbolic power, but lacked unified structure. So the real question becomes, if fasting already existed across civilizations, if Arabia already understood sacred months, then what exactly changed in the 7th century? That transformation is what turned a human instinct into a global system. And that is where Ramadan begins to take its distinct form. By the early 7th century, the Arabian Peninsula was a crossroads of trade, culture, and belief. Caravans moved between the Byzantine and Persian empires. Merchants carried not only goods, spices, textiles, metals, but also ideas. In the city of Mecca, a merchant named Muhammad began receiving what Muslims believed to be divine revelations around the year 610 CE. These revelations would later form the Quran. But at the beginning, the movement was small, vulnerable, contested. The early Muslim community faced social pressure, economic boycotts, and at times persecution. It was not yet a civilization. It was a fragile network of believers trying to define themselves. And this is where fasting transformed. The Quran instructed believers to fast during a specific lunar month, Ramadan. But this was not a vague suggestion. It was structured. From dawn until sunset, Muslims were commanded to abstain from food, drink, sexual relations, not for a single day, but for an entire month. This shift was revolutionary in three ways. First, synchronization. Instead of individuals choosing personal fasts, an entire community fasted together, starting and ending at the same time. Hunger became collective. Second, calendar identity. Ramadan followed the lunar cycle. That meant it would rotate through the seasons, moving approximately 10 to 11 days earlier each year in the solar calendar. Over decades, Muslims would experience Ramadan in scorching summers and cold winters. The practice would never become comfortable or predictable. Third, meaning. Ramadan was tied to revelation. Muslims believed that during this month, the first verses of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad. That association elevated Ramadan beyond discipline. It became historical memory. Fasting was no longer just about restraint. It became about remembrance. But the transformation did not happen instantly. In early Islamic history, fasting regulations evolved. Some historical reports suggest that before the obligation of Ramadan was finalized, other fasting days were practiced, including a day known as Ashura, which may have overlapped with Jewish fasting traditions in Medina. Gradually, Ramadan became the standardized and obligatory fast. This standardization was critical. Religion survived not only through belief, but through repeated ritual. A ritual that happens daily is powerful. A ritual that happens annually and is shared by everyone is even more powerful. Ramadan created rhythm. Dawn meals, known as suhoor, structured early mornings. Sunset meals, iftar, transformed evenings into moments of relief and gratitude. Time itself began to feel different during this month. Days slowed, nights intensified, and something psychological happened. When hunger is experienced alone, it is suffering. When hunger is experienced together, it becomes identity. For the early Muslim community, especially after the migration from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE, this shared identity was essential. It distinguished believers from surrounding tribes and religious groups. It created cohesion. It built discipline. It reinforced belonging. By the time the Muslim community expanded beyond Arabia, into the Levant, North Africa, Persia, Ramadan was no longer an emerging practice. It was institutionalized. And this is the crucial point. Islam did not invent fasting, but it engineered it. It took an ancient human instinct and embedded it into a synchronized, lunar, globally scalable system. A system that could cross languages, cross climates, cross empires. And that structural transformation is what allowed Ramadan to endure, not for decades, but for more than 14 centuries. As Islamic civilization expanded across North Africa, Spain, Persia, Central Asia, Ramadan evolved culturally. Under empires like the Umayyads and Abbasids, cities became illuminated during the fasting month. Markets would open after sunset. Poetry gatherings would happen at night, mosques would fill with recitations. In places like Cairo and Istanbul, a Ramadan cannon was fired at sunset to signal the end of the fast. In parts of the Ottoman world, drummers walked the streets before dawn to wake people for suhoor, the pre-dawn meal. Ramadan was no longer just a religious obligation. It became a social rhythm. Day became quiet, night became alive. You may have seen images of Muslims breaking their fast with dates. Why dates? Because in Arabian culture, dates were nutrient-dense, easily stored, widely available, and historical reports describe Muhammad breaking his fast with dates and water. Over time, this became symbolic. Today, from Indonesia to Morocco, millions begin their evening meal the same way, with a small fruit that once grew in desert oases. A simple act, repeated for over a millennium. Today, Ramadan looks different depending on where you are. In Indonesia, entire neighborhoods glow with lanterns. In Turkey, drummers still walk the streets before dawn. In northern countries like Sweden or Canada, fasting hours can stretch extremely long during summer. In 2026, Ramadan moves earlier in the year because it follows the lunar calendar, shifting about 10 to 11 days annually. That means over a lifetime, Muslims experience Ramadan in every season. Winter fasts are short. Summer fasts can be intense. Yet participation continues to grow. Why? Because beyond theology, Ramadan creates something rare in modern life: shared sacrifice. Entire communities eat together. Work schedules shift. Families reconnect. For 1 month, time itself feels different. So did fasting exist before Islam? Yes, but Ramadan transformed fasting into something structured, global, and deeply communal. It linked physical hunger with spiritual reflection. It synchronized millions of people across continents, and it turned one lunar month into a worldwide experience of discipline and empathy. Whether you observe it or not, Ramadan remains one of the most powerful recurring cultural events on earth, and it happens every single year.